And we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Perspective Philosophy, where we try to better our perceptions of the world through philosophical discussion. Today, we will be discussing whether the UK will be vegan by 2030. So today, I really thought we'd go through the recent claims that the UK will be vegan by 2030. This was put forward by a guy called Thom on YouTube. I've got his channel in the description if anyone is interested, well, at least the video in question, in which he argues that the UK will be vegan by 2030. And he says that I quite like how he kind of puts it across, because he doesn't say that the UK will be vegan by 2030. He says that so many people will be vegan by 2030 that animal agriculture will no longer be a sustainable industry, forcing veganism to become the social norm. So today we're going to discuss that, whether that's true and whether or not his claims are even remotely feasible. Because if I'm honest, I hold the absolute opposite side. I don't think that. Sorry about this, guys. Let's move this. It just likes to swing all over the place. Yeah, so I don't think that we will be vegan necessarily by 2040, and that's 2030, sorry. And that's not because I don't want us to be, because I do. And I do think that veganism is growing exponentially, but the method in which he used, which he did criticize himself, was fairly flawed. What he used was a survey, and it just essentially picked out how many vegans on Facebook. I think it was 2,418, 2,413, something like 2.5 thousand people, and asked them when they went vegan, how old they were, and he went through the demographics. And he argued that most people, 82.5% of those that he surveyed, went vegan in the last 5 years. And what we are seeing is an exponential growth in relation to veganism now and into the future. And that he overall predicted that the trend will mean that by 2030, there will be 15% of the UK's population who will be vegan. Now, the reason why he thinks that's an important number is because of a conversation he had with Melanie Joy. I think it was Melanie Joy. He said about how many people need to be vegan before animal agriculture is no longer a sustainable industry. So this would mean that so many people have went vegan that animal agriculture no longer makes a profit from producing animals and selling them. So that they're a dying market, in other words. And that only 15% would destabilize this. And this isn't surprising, to be honest, because animal agriculture is already heavily subsidized. Massively, actually. It receives billions, I think, every year in the United Kingdom, and more so in the United States, but in the United Kingdom as well, it receives millions. Milk industry was particularly having a tough time, I think, in the UK. So tragic, but it's definitely a struggling industry, and veganism is partly to do with that. It's putting prices up, because if people do not demand milk, dairy, or eggs, or meat, these products become more. The supply becomes more not scarce. Try and use the right terminology, economic terminology. Not important, but essentially, the prices will go up because there's less to sell. It's like if you look at it like the sale of like household essentials, you'll see that cheapers out. Well, if you look at the sales of something like I don't know, like the same product but more of an exclusive brand, a lot of that comes because there's a lower demand for a certain kind of product in the first place. The issue is, in this video, he makes a few grandiose claims that I thought we should address. So I found this on Plant-Based News. It was a good article. It was very short, so I suggest going and checking it out. He says that in his video, though, he says that, yeah, wait a minute, I'll see. Right. Yeah, so he said that 15% is what we need. Now, what he's arguing for is conceptual growth, right? So that this idea that the populations can have predictable behavioral patterns which we can track. These trends can be tracked over time. Well, no, they can't, right? And people are going to be thinking like, Lewis, are you're being ridiculous. Of course they can. We can see the growth in time of markets and so on. Well, no, we can't. Economics is not a science, and neither is any other social science. They're all grandiose predictions based on a hoax that was brought up around in the 20th century that we could predict human behavior. But Adam Smith still holds true. The invisible hand controls the markets, and the invisible hand actually controls our lives, because we do not know what concept will develop next. Alistair McIntyre talks about this in After Virtue. He says that for us to be able to predict this kind of like to have any kind of law-like generalizations in which we would see, what way things are going to go, we would need to be able to predict the conceptions that aren't conceived yet. And we would also then need to be able to predict how we will conceive newly on those conceptions. So it's a total, it's managing, it's what's called game theory, in fact. It's when you predict one movement on top of another, it increases the statistical improbability of any move, any position that you predict being true. And, it just adds another factor into the equation. Now, even if there is only a certain number of like ways it could go vegan or not vegan, it doesn't make the statistical likelihood of this being the case any easier to predict. So the way that I'm going to approach this is to not say that it didn't hold any merit, because it did hold some. He raised some interesting questions, but let us just be clear. Not only, even if he managed to make a flawless study, absolutely flawless, which it wasn't, and he admitted that himself, which is fine, he would not be able to predict whether veganism would occur within 2030. And this is even assuming that 15% of the population would collapse a market. So let's take it from there. So, right. So I thought some interesting points that he raised was on capitalism and how it affects individuals. This idea that 15% of the market would destabilize the animal agriculture industry is what I found most interesting. And it's probably true in the sense that it would destabilize the profit margins that we hold today. But by 2030, if we are predicting a vegan future, then obviously animal agriculture will be attempting to innovate now. Or at least, I don't think he realizes that economics is so unpredictable that, not only could market fluctuations in general related to, grain production and so on, affect the efficacy of animal agriculture, but also new technological developments, and even exporting current capitalist methods to foreign countries. So we would be seeing maybe a greater exportation of capitalism to maybe African countries, maybe South American countries, which we already do in relation to animal agriculture. And this might increase the profit margins on these products, because they could pay the workers less, because they might get the land for cheaper, and so on. So you might see that certain areas of animal agriculture may die first. So maybe the ones that are higher welfare in the UK may be destroyed first, because they're not a sustainable market with the current population, which would not be surprising. Then we would see an increase in second world and third world production and imports of meat, dairy, and eggs. Also, it has to do with the currency and how our currency is set up. If the pound raised in value, for example, imports would become cheaper. I think that's how it works. Was it like, if we raise the currency, imports become cheaper, but exports raise in price? So imports would become cheaper, and we might raise our currency in order to combat, meat, dairy, and eggs being a product which is continuously imported. Now, UK already does that, but we would see if this increases. The point I'm trying to raise is that it's a very, very bold claim to say capitalism would annihilate would annihilate the non-vegan market by 2030. And it's important to recognize that meat, dairy, and eggs are not the only animal products that people buy. They buy leather, okay? They buy silk. They buy a plethora of different animal products that aren't related to diet. So this wouldn't be a win for veganism, maybe a win for a plant-based diet, even if it was true, but it might be a win for veganism. So I do have my doubts, although it is incredibly, incredibly interesting to talk about, because I think that if people talk about this, it's going to have a greater impact than this idea of the prediction itself. It's almost going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we tell people that the world will be, or even the UK will be vegan by 2030, the likelihood that it will be vegan by 2030 will skyrocket because it's becoming a social norm. It will be infiltrating, the conversations of individuals throughout the UK, where they're thinking they have to adapt to it, and they'll become more accustomed to vegan products and a vegan lifestyle, and this idea that they may have to live in a vegan world. And that, I think, is the power of this predictive process, not necessarily the process itself, because I think that's actually a little bit of hogwash, but the ideological power around science and the way that people treat science is definitely going to affect how people approach veganism within the next 10, 20 years. So I think that's something to look to. Also, just before we move on, hello everyone. Hello Magnus, nice to see you here again. Race Lover. Perpetually Annoyed, hello. Garrix and Max and Mordig. I hope I said that right. Helene. Nice to see you all. If you have any input in this conversation, please just let me know. I would like to hear other people's perspectives in relation to this topic, because I think I would love veganism to become the norm within our culture. It would make me so happy. But I don't think we should have our heads in the clouds, and I think that we shouldn't allow these predictions to drop vegan morale, or even prevent us from making those extra steps. Because I think that when a goal is further away, you realize you have to run faster, okay, to get there. And I think we just need to push through, regardless of how close or how far veganism seems. We need to pursue it as a goal, to become the norm, to become the ethical understanding of individuals throughout the UK. And we should be having talks about this, having conversations with people. Now, I don't believe that we can force it. And this is one of the problems I have with his points. Hello, Austin, and hello, Christophe. Serb. Is veganism really the most healthy diet? Can a ketogenic diet be just as healthy? No, well, I'm not going to talk about this discussion, but if you look, I would suggest looking at, I think Mike the Vegan has a really good video on keto, and I think Dr. Gregor, like nutritionfacts.org. I mean, if you look, ketogenic diets, the evidence shows that cholesterol doesn't drop as you lose weight, which is like the only diet that doesn't happen. Like vegan keto is fine, but a normal ketogenic diet doesn't drop cholesterol, which is a great risk factor for heart disease. Just to respond to Magnus here, I don't actually reject grand narratives. I'm a Hegelian. I'm actually about moral progress, and I believe that it's something that we can be sure to be the case. The difference, what I'm seeing, is I can't tell you the next stage of moral development because I am born now. I'm incapable of understanding it, because moral development is based upon the application of reason and conceptual development, and I'm simply a man of my time, and that's the issue. And it's not that I don't believe that there will be a vegan future. I'm pretty confident there will be. And I think that we can make a pretty good guess of why and why our culture will develop this way. But we can't be sure on how the population will approach the concepts in which are developed throughout that time. And I can't tell you what my children or their children and the children after them will be thinking. That's not something I believe that I can predict. But social science seems to make populations into samples of data, which they're not. They're constantly changing variables, and this is just the reality of the situation. And I think that's why a lot of social scientists these days are actually saying that humans aren't social constructions, but rather than we construct our culture, and that there is a human mechanism evolving within this social dynamic. Now, it's not that I disagree in some respects, but I think a lot of them like to be more reductionist than not, pointing towards our biology because they could make law-like generalizations based off psychology. And I think psychology is not a science and social sciences aren't a science. And once we realize that, we'll see that they're incredibly useful, but not so much that they're able to, I wouldn't bet my life on it, at least. So I'm drinking coffee. Please expand on the definition of veganism. Well, veganism is a philosophy and a way of living which seeks to exclude as far as possible and practicable all forms of exploitation of animals and oh damn it, that's as far as I got. I'll tell you. I'll link it in the chat. The Vegan Society is the definition I go off. I find it the most useful. I'll just link not the definition's too long, so I'll just link the. There you go. That's the definition I would use. Does a man of your time not also poison or otherwise bias your perception of the past, giving illusion of moral progress? Of course it does. But I think what we need to be aware of is epistemic justifications and our ability to answer questions. And I think once we realize that that what progression is the accuracy of a conception of reality and not necessarily one ontological understanding over another, and that good is a constantly as an ontological object is it remains constantly the same. It's a divinity almost, and it acts as I would say a constant distance from the individual that never changes. And I think that's why someone like Iris Murdoch would say that good is not the esoteric object of philosophers, but the tool of every rational man. Yes, I'm still running with the Vegan Society definition. So I hope that answers your question, Magnus. Also, Vegan Voyager, nice to see you here. Very, very nice. I never seen you here for a while. Right. So, back to the predictions. Okay. So I do think that the idea of exponential growth is justified, though. I think not in the fact that it can be guaranteed, because I don't. But I think the likelihood of growth as veganism becomes a cultural norm, will increase the disciplinary power upon individuals within society. People will feel the presence of veganism more in their lives, and that will alter people's behavior at a faster rate. One vegan doesn't just influence a single vegan, they influence one vegan doesn't influence a single person, they influence all of those around them. They change the norms and conventions of their state. Now, the more individuals we have, the more those conventions change, the more likely we ought to see a vegan future, because the power of individuals acting upon other individuals increases. We're seeing a greater amount of institutional power related to veganism then. And I think that's what would be responsible for exponential growth. I think moral intuitionism isn't a problem. I think that people's intuitions are typically just value structures in which they can't explain. Individuals are constructs from the state, from their socio-political environment. Their intuitions typically are derived from their moral education, from being autonomously moral. The issue is that a lot of people don't adopt autonomous morality and take responsibility for themselves, and begin an an expansion onto why they believe such things. And I think that slows for moral progress. But I don't think it's a problem, because the reason that we are here in the first place is because of conceptual development, and people's concepts develop implicitly through their actions day to day. They don't necessarily have to try to progress them. We constantly challenge reality every time we look at it. Value structures are built up and destroyed around us at every moment, and we internalize this, and this becomes our normal understanding. So I don't think that moral intuitionism is necessarily true. I don't think that, in the sense that I wouldn't say I don't think we have to all be you know non-cognitivists, or was it like kind of like J.E. Moore, where it's like moral non-naturalists, so we can't speak of morality. I do, however, think that there is a perceptual reasoning going on within individuals, and I think to deny this would deny the understanding in which individuals have by worldly interaction. In response to the question of the stream title, no, it won't. Well, we'll see. We'll see, SD, because like you've got to remember that. Okay, it's not definitely going to be the case. But as we said, like, we cannot predict the future. Like, as well as I do, that we don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know that if, there could be a massive plague that hits livestock, right, in the 2025, called something like mad cow's disease. People become incredibly scared of, all of these potential causes of death, whatever it may be. And because of that, they start turning to plant-based alternatives. That boosts up the market, advertising goes up, institutional power increases. Not only on top of that, but then people are scared to go to animal products. They start looking into ideological alternatives and understanding themselves as someone that does not have to be associated with meat, dairy, and eggs as a implicit ideological stance, which is controlling their lives. And I think that once we realize that, that could have a massive impact upon individuals. So I don't think that we can predict the future. There is a definite unpredictability of life, and I think that we all need to realize that. I saw you posted in the Veganism Debate Discord that you were interested in some more debates. Would you be interested in debate your Hegelian perception of history? Oh dear God. Oh dear God. I mean, yes, I'm always interested in debate for my boy Hegel. But it's not going to be a fun debate for those people that are just going to hear me go like screaming the common will into the camera. But we'll see. Oh, Thom, nice to have you here. This is the man in the chat who made the video. I suggest everyone check it out. I think I've got his video in the description. Yeah. So go check it out. Thom, I think you're wrong. If you're wondering why, there's a few explanations earlier in the video. But essentially, I think that that we cannot predict human behavior, and that even if we could, that the understanding that 15% of the population would necessarily collapse a market is flawed because of the unpredictability of markets themselves. So I hope that there's a quick summary of where we've gotten so far. I'm not sure if you saw this question. Do you think veganism entails the abortion of pets? I was like, oh Jesus, that's awful. Abolition of pets or any form of captive animals. Not necessarily. I think you can have symbiotic relationships with animals, and I think that can be useful too. Just to bring it back to the overall question that we are talking about, will we be vegan in 2030? So, what I did like about Thom's video is I think it was part 2. He starts talking about the demographics as well. Now, he said, well, you said, Thom, since you're here, that 72% of the people surveyed were women. And it is come up quite often that most vegans are women, but we should aim with our activism more towards women because it's more effective. Well, I think that that is completely and absolutely false, and let me explain why. So, um, let's just imagine that we try and convince as many women as possible, because we're already succeeding in that respect. First, we don't know what's holding back the rest of the women who aren't already vegan. Perhaps it's the fact that they are being influenced by non-vegan men. There's just one spanner in the works. The second, I would say, is that we do not want individual demographics to be associated with veganism. Veganism is not about progressing the moral institutions of a given individual. Well, it is, but given individual demographics, it's about institutional change within our state. We will see the most rapid development if we aim outwards at as many people as possible. Because if we do that, we will see that if we can convince, for example, someone that's an older person, you said that you were quite surprised that more elderly people were actually, well, not just elderly, but middle-aged people were involved in veganism. We will see that they will influence those around them. They're involved in different institutions, different ways of life. They talk to different people and they have a different level of respect within our society. Their place in their institutions, their place in our institutions affects how veganism will be seen and treated. A lot of individuals see veganism as radical already or overly emotional. Last thing we want to do, and it's an unfortunate stereotype that I feel bad for women for having, but women are associated with being overly emotional. Women are associated with being um, associated with diet trends. That's not where we want veganism to be. We want veganism to be seen across the whole spectrum. We want everyone to go vegan. It is not okay that one person eats meat. And that's just the reality of the situation. And to deny this is to deny what veganism stands for, I would argue. And I think is to limit the efficacy of vegan activism. Now, on a broader sense, I see your point that getting the population to go vegan and collapse a market would influence individuals, because it's almost Marx's criticism of Hegel. If markets create individuals and would destroy the market that's creating non-vegan individuals, people will go vegan at a much faster rate because anti-vegan propaganda will die out. Right? Interesting, right? And it also, the ability to feed people non-vegan products would become considerably hindered. I get the point. Now, the point I made earlier about industrialization, about the industry and its ability to adapt and potential economic shifts, I think still stands. The ability to collapse a market is unlikely, just by influencing one demographic, because then you could influence the other demographic, create a reinforcing market, a market that is reinforced by the negative. Think of it as like reactionary conservatism or reactionary progressivism. All they have to do is say that one side dislikes the other, or that one side has chosen one path and the other has chosen the other. And the markets will reinforce each other simply because they are opposites, because they are opposed. Now, in which case, if we convince women to go vegan, then it will become a masculine trait which can be marketed to men to eat meat, to eat more and more meat. And I think that that's an unfortunate reality of how marketing works. It works by manipulating the implicit ideological stances of individuals. And that is why we need one of the broadest possible conceptualization within individuals, within society as possible. And we need it to be rational. We do not need it to be emotional. And I think a lot of women are appealed to mostly because of this negative stereotype by emotions. And if we, in the words of Peter Singer, you don't have to like black people to realize that you shouldn't kill them. I think I'm paraphrasing, but the point still stands. It's not about emotions. It's about rational justifications for our actions and moral progression that we need to focus on. And markets should be influenced by individuals and not the other way around. And that's how we should be making it. Now, veganism is one of the first trends ethically that has really taken control of the individual's place within a market. And that's something that I've been incredibly excited to see, that individuals are finally understanding themselves to have more power within our society, and that they are not the victims of our economic environment, but they are the participants. Now, if we don't keep that going, if we don't expect individuals to realize that, we can change the way the market is, and we can change who we are. And if we change who we are and how we behave, we change what can be marketed to us. Then we are giving people an ideological control over themselves that they've never seen before. And we're introducing them to a new kind of freedom that I think is essential for veganism. And this is my next point. What you are talking about is not veganism, it's a plant based lifestyle. It's not the moral development of individuals. It's it's a shift in the markets. Now, there's nothing to stop the markets from shifting back if the individuals who are part of the markets don't realize that they are wrong for buying these products. If they just move because they're not there, then there's no reason why they wouldn't move back if they came back as well. Um, my thinking was so Thom said, my thinking was more in terms of effectiveness in saying vegan activism, say a cube of truth. If you have a chance of speaking to a man or a woman, should we prioritize? You see, if anything, funnily enough, when you said this, my first thought was like, oh, that's a good point. We need to aim more at men. Clearly, we're not getting through to men as much as women. We need better male representatives. Well, not necessarily male, but better representatives that appeal to a male demographic, and that we need to analyze maybe how effective our what's the word our activism truly is, who we're getting through to and why, I think is what we need to be asking. And I think that's actually a great point that was raised by your video. I really did appreciate that, because I don't think many of us consider a lot of the time what it means to have effective activism. I was thinking about doing some talks actually in the future on power, because I don't think people realize how power operates in our society. And I'm not talking about manipulating individuals, but even to get people into a conversation about a particular concept, people don't realize takes political power, because some concepts, some conversations are silenced by implicitly within some ideological stances in society. It would be it would have been heresy, for example, to talk about atheism at a certain time in our past, in our ideological past. And now it's mainstream and it's easy to talk about. And in fact, in many cases, it's harder to say you're a Christian or you're a religious believer than it is to say you're an atheist. And this is the kind of silence I'm talking about. We need to make sure that veganism doesn't fall down that political hole where men are scared to talk about, veganism and being vegan, because I think there is a stigma about being vegan as a man, and I think it's this idea of being feminine, and I think that we need to challenge that. And I think we can challenge that by being men who are vegan and challenging it, but by also explaining that compassion, what is compassion, is not a feminine trait. It's not. It's related to, empathy, and that can be related to women in some respects. Culturally, women are supposed to have a different emotional range to men, but that doesn't make compassion, empathy, and caringness feminine. And it certainly doesn't make the rational justifications for our actions feminine. Now, I think that's where I would attack this point with men. I would call men unreasonable rather than for not conversing about veganism. Not for not being vegan, because I think that's ad hominem. But if you're not willing to have the conversation in the first place, then you are already accepting that there is a reason you don't want it. And I think the reason you don't want it is because you have a status quo bias. Um, Yeah, no, Tom, exactly. But you seem like quite a masculine kind of guy, and I think that a lot of people would, like a lot of men would respond and respect you as they'd see themselves in you. And that's not because men are, sexist bastards. Some maybe, but it's more to do with the fact that we see ourselves in other people, and that what we respond to is personalities. It's implicit. It's built into who we are. Now, not that it can't be overcome and how we approach life, but unfortunately, it works. I mean, if you look at ad campaigns, they understand what appeals to men, and they understand how to appeal to men. But broadly across all of our society, the way that they appeal to us is by presenting another personality in which we would want to be. And this is an aesthetic ideal. This is someone who we associate with being a better form of ourselves and has attributes or has achieved something that we wish to achieve, and so we emulate them. Now, the point of what we want to do is encourage people to understand that there are virtues related to veganism, that compassion, caringness, and strength are not opposed, right? So compassion and caringness may be feminine and strength may be seen as masculine, but there is a strength in defending animals. There is a strength in defending the weak and the vulnerable. And I think that's how we may need to appeal to men. And as you say, as a tall, man who's, in good shape. I mean, I think I saw you with a vegan runner's top on. They're going to associate you with an understanding of themselves. They would understand that there wouldn't have to be a weak, frail, like ill, sick, feminine little soy boy, and I think that helps. I really do. What? I'm not answering that, Magnus. Um, SD says, "I'm not going vegan that much. I promise you. As per our discussion, where you agreed, I have to kill animals. I have to kill animals. Like, well, SD, I'm not saying that you necessarily will go vegan. I won't say that. I'm not going to say never. Right? You might. That's your choice, right? That's ultimately your decision. And the whole point of moral progression, in which the way I see it, is that it should be individual and should be adopted as the rational course of action from individuals. We can't progress it by enforcing it, even legislating it against, a small majority of the population. We wouldn't be showing them why it's wrong. It's I'll give you an example, which is I think quite a controversial example, but I think it demonstrates the the implicit ideology behind it. Now, we could say that, for example, we could ban slaughter in the UK, and I think that's something that will happen and should happen eventually. Now, as democracy progresses, but we couldn't ban people consuming animals, or people being animals, for example, or whatever it may be. What we would be doing then is like banning the burqa. This is the way I see it. We may see the burqa or hijab or whatever it may be as something oppressive to women. We may see it as an ideological constraint used to show women that they cannot behave in a certain way because they are women. Now, I think that is something that comes around a lot in society, and it was very prevalent in France with the banning of the burqa. People understood it to be wrong, but they made a grave mistake, because you cannot ban a belief system. You can ban the outward action, but you cannot ban the beliefs. They exist beyond the power of the state, and that's just something that we have to accept. And it's the same with meat eaters, and well, we'll call it carnism ideologically, because I don't know any other word that would be appropriate. Although carnism, I think some people were saying that there was some people using it negatively. Regardless, let's just say that is the ideological stance of individuals. We couldn't ban that. So I think that's something to be considered. I'm never going to be able to tell you that you won't be vegan. right? And I don't think that I can tell you that you won't be allowed to be a carnist, because that would be irrational. What I can say is that you will see the institutions progressing around you, and there's a good reason to believe that. And I think Thom's predictions support that. Not scientifically, we'll have no real law-like generalizations, but they offer some hope, we'll call it. In a post-carnist world, would you treat meeting it as a criminal act or as a psychological disorder? Well, well, because it's ideological, it'll be treated as a psychological disorder. Let's be honest, it will be. Whether that is right or not, I cannot say. I think treating it as a psychological disorder is wrong. And the reason I'm going to say it is wrong is because it will not respect the moral agency of those involved. I think you'd have to show that the individual was irrational when they were making the actions before you could imply that they were irrational in making them. So it's like you could be a murderer who is not insane, or you could be a murderer who is insane. What we need to first verify is whether you are rational or not when you are committing the action. If we verify that you weren't rational and that we have a reason to believe you weren't rational, then you should be treated as having a psychological disorder. If we find that you were rational, then you should be treated as a criminal to respect your moral agency in order to preserve the right and the understanding of action in the first place that is derived from moral agency. Because otherwise, we would be destroying the foundations in which abstract right was built. So I hope that answers that. So I'm irrational for killing animals that would otherwise eat most of the food you want to buy from the supermarket. Come on, man. I'm not calling you irrational, SD. I'm not, and I'm not saying that. I think you're wrong. Like, okay, like we both think we're each other's wrong. I think that's guaranteed. We didn't have a debate because we think each other were right. I do think that what needs to happen first, I think that what needs to happen is for your, I don't take this the wrong way as well. Like, I really don't want you to take this the wrong way. For your job to become completely outdated. I want your job to be completely nullified. I want the market to develop in such a way that we can prevent, crop destruction and without harming any sentient being. Right. And I think that's something that as vegans, we should be looking into, sustainable forms of agriculture or horticulture. And if anything, I would say, and also don't take this the wrong way, but in many ways, I would see you as a victim of your career choice. And I know that probably sounds quite condescending, but it's not meant to be. I think that violence harms individuals in general. I think that violence is a bad thing psychologically for individuals. And I think that perhaps the way that you were raised has made you maybe be able to deal with it in a much better way than most other people. But a lot of people don't have that benefit, and they don't have that that mental fortitude even. And I can see people falling victim to psychological disorders such as PTSD and PITS disorder from an outward expression of violence, especially as veganism grows within the biostructures of our society. So I don't think you're a bad person, SD. I don't think you're necessarily irrational, at least in yourself. I don't think you're being irrational. But I think that, just to put it more broadly, we will all be made irrational by the progression of history. And that's just how moral progress and rational progression works. The limits of our reason will show us all to be fools eventually. Our grandchildren will look at us like we're silly old people, and their grandchildren will look at them as if they're silly old people. And that's just the way life works. Right. I agree with most of your points. Great discussion. However, I'm not concerned with people going back to eating animals if their entry point into veganism is just because Because of the great plant-based. Well, I am really. Look at, for example, like I know that you are like. I think your video was titled "Don't worry about this trend of ex-vegans." Oh no, we should totally worry about this trend of ex-vegans because these people were never vegan in the first place in this idea. And I think that's the point. Like, we're not we're not changing the ideological stances of individuals, which causes the suffering. We are just preventing the suffering. It's very utilitarian. It's a lovely conception, but it's just simply devoid of any real moral progression, which would prevent it from happening again. And something else happening again, some form of exploitation, whether it's medical uses of animals or whether it's other markets in which they abuse animals, these would still occur because the ideological stances of individuals would not be based around the avoidance of these products. So we do need to be steadfast in the ways in which we present veganism to the general population as a conception of moral progression and engage people in as much as possible in rational discussions. Because the point of what I'm trying to say is that veganism is at the end of a rational moral progression for the most of our society, and that it's the limits of our personhood. Now, as time goes on, more and more people will be susceptible to veganism as an ideological stance. But changing the market may increase this susceptibility. I think you would be right in saying that, but it would not increase the probability of veganism. It would increase the probability of plant-based consumption, or even welfareism in many cases. I think welfareism can pop up very rapidly as a half measure in which people go to. A lot of these ex-vegans start saying that they eat, grass-fed beef and all this. And grass-fed beef people are saying that it's more ethical and that it's more sustainable. Now, I'm going to be doing a video on that in the future, but if that kind of ideological stance is allowed to take hold, it will corrupt how individuals act in their day-to-day lives, and the markets will change and revert back, regardless of how well our activism goes, regardless of how well our market campaigns go when it comes to products. Well, I do think it's a gradual moral progress within individuals. Don't get me wrong, but you have to get the progress started, don't you? You have to start somewhere. And I think I think that a lot of people, they enter veganism in the sense that they think it's a diet. They think that it's a way to lose weight. Especially, I think there's a lot of young, vulnerable women who see it as a way to mask eating disorders. Now, veganism's not that, and I don't think veganism should be avoided for that. I think my girlfriend had done a video on that a while ago, and she made some really good points. But it unfortunately does occur, and we do not want veganism to be associated with that kind of ideology. We want it to be associated with the reasons that we should be vegan. And this is the point I'm trying to make. That's what should be controlling the markets. People shouldn't be controlled by the markets. We should be controlling the markets ourselves by the actions we commit in our day-to-day lives. Vertical farming, I don't know very much about vertical farming, if I'm honest. I do need to look more into farming methods. I wanted to look into. I was supposed to have a debate with a farmer, actually. He never got back to us, or did I not get back to him? I think I was supposed to. Oh God, I'll have to double check. But I was supposed to have a debate with a farmer. And he was gonna. We're gonna talk about various forms of farming. So I thought that would be interesting. So hopefully I'll be able to do an episode on that. I'm going to be streaming every night for the next 30 days. So I thought that, we can have conversations on this, and we can continue to progress these questions and hopefully seek answers together. You wince every time I mention the progression of history. Is that just because it calls your character into question, Magnus? You start to realize, oh God, I could be wrong. Uh, SD, this message will be my last question or statement. The only way you could be right is if reality itself turns out to be wrong. Let's have another discussion soon. Love you, SD. Nice to see you, man. Have a nice day. Well, this is the point. Like, truth is how we understand reality. And this is why reality is not an individual's conception, because that would be caprice, right? We would be generating reality from caprice. So, what we need to understand is that reality is our conception of the world that is given to us by our institutional environment. That's why ideology, when it's corrupted, can be so powerful upon individuals. Why individuals can be convinced to blow themselves up, for an implicit ideological stance related to religion. That this is, you are fighting for God, and all of this, because ideology is so powerful. It can manipulate the very walls around you are shaped by your ideology just as much as they shape your ideology. They can shape you. They are shaped by your ideology. And it's like, to give you a real life example, it's like when you look at the stars at night, what you really see is white dots on a black material. You don't actually see anything. You may have you don't even see black and white, really. What you see is an intermix of sensory data, of sense datum or whatever, that you perceive for a brief moment. That's all you get. And yet, from that point, we have visions of stellar bodies with orbiting satellites and balls of, superheated plasma that are being produced by a process called nuclear fusion, all governed by gravity and the laws of physics that are operating throughout the universe. Now, none of that is actually implicit when I look at the stars. And that is the power of ideology. And I think that most people need to realize that. Hiya, Chris. I think veganism is unhealthy and dangerous, and it ruined my wife's health. Well, I mean, you're welcome to explain why. I don't think that's the case. I think you have to show why it ruined your wife's health. And not only that, like, you've got to remember that people can do veganism wrong, like, as all diets can be done wrong. Like, if your wife was, not consuming the right products, and maybe she had other health issues that were involved. Don't be so quick to blame the diet unless you have evidence to blame it. So remember that. Um, right. Hi, don't you dare. You're a good lad. There are no evidence that eating meat is wrong when we evolved to do this. Well, animals can be moral victims, actually, 20 faces, because, well, they can feel suffering and they are sentient beings. And what is morally considerable is desire. And animals are at the mercy of desire, if anything. And so they are incredibly morally susceptible. Now, when you say that there is no evidence to eating meat is wrong, well, I'll happily debate you on it. And just because we evolved to do something doesn't make it okay. Even if we did, because we are capable of digesting animal products. One, it doesn't mean that it's healthy for us. And two, it doesn't mean that we should do it. That would be an appeal to nature. And I think an entirely unjustified one. Now, not to say that if we had no other choice but to eat meat, then we shouldn't be vegan. Then that's a different question. But then you'd have to show empirically why we would be incapable of consuming plant products for a healthy, sustainable life. Maybe off topic, but if you had to provide one of the best pro-life argument you could off the top of your head, what would it be? Pro-life. Now, I've been recently involved in some abortion debates, mainly because of veganism, actually. Trying to promote sentientism as an understanding of how we should approach moral dilemma. Because I think a lot of people like to approach it as one secular moral system against another. Now, I'm not going to really address abortion so much, Magnus, I'm sorry, but this is kind of what happens with veganism. You see this idea of like two ideologies clashing, and we don't want that. Veganism is not at war with anyone. And it's one of the reasons why I think, Thom, that we don't want to just approach one demographic, because there is implicit conflict between personalities. What we want to show is that veganism is not the result of me telling you to go vegan, but the result of your reasoning in relation to the actions you make. And so what we need to do is appeal to those understandings and those values that individuals already hold and help build them up towards it. And that's and show the contradictions within their belief systems. Use the Socratic method, in other words. And I think that once we do that and we operate on a more broadly ideological scale, where we approach ideologies that may even conflict with veganism, and we approach them as not an enemy to be conquered, but as another individual to converse with. That is how we change individuals for the better. What if vegans can't agree what is and what is not vegan? It seems to me that the vegan community talks a lot about vegan future, but don't know what. Well, I don't think so. I think that internal conflict is what progresses an institution and a tradition. If we did not have conflict within veganism, we would soon die out. All traditions that don't conflict each other die out. I mean, look at or at least become so dogmatic they can be dismissed on a whim by another individual. I mean, look at, let's say, republicanism versus the Democrats versus Republicans in America. Everything that they do, say, and think is given to them hegemonically, and it's not something they question for the most part. And so when they go into a discussion, they basically start yelling assertions at each other that both parties reject as dogmatic. Now, we don't want that to happen with veganism. What we want to happen with veganism is strong arguments. We want strong reasons that relate to the lives of everyday individuals within our society and culture, that we can go, you should be vegan because of this. You should be vegan because of that. And if we have bad arguments for veganism, they need to be, they need to be weaned out. They need to be removed, because they become liabilities. They only harm our progression, because a lot of the time they can be used as straw men to be defeated. And people will strawman us all the time as vegans. I mean, I think all vegan activists will tell you that they'll hear some absolutely ridiculous statements from individuals in the general population, not because they're bad people, but because they've heard, certain things from media outlets a lot of the time. But if we propagate our own myths and legends, then we are going to be dismissed as being myths and legends. We are going to be dismissed as being irrational, as dogmatic. And I think that's why we need to focus on progressing veganism as a form and a way of arguing and a way of conversing with individuals. It's a tool, not a stance in itself. It's something that everyone can adopt, and it should be it should be applied to the way that they think and they approach life. Right. Hello, Banana Warrior Princess. Nice to see you here. Nice. I haven't seen your video yet. I was going to watch it before this stream, and then I never got the chance. Very sorry about that. I will go and watch it though. I will give it a like. Wolf25. Well, Wolf. I can't say that. Wolof. We'll say Wolof. What if vegans can't agree? Oh no, that's one I've just read. What is an appeal to nature fallacious? What is an appeal to nature fallacious in this instance? Especially when we can see that morality is inevitably linked to human nature. Well, morality may be very well linked to human nature, but then human nature isn't stable at all. Human nature is not a biological inevitability. Human nature is a construction sociologically between individuals, and that when we show comparisons that apparently prove a particular form of human action, what we really do is compare one society against its historical counterpart or cultural counterpart and say, wow, how amazing is it that human nature is correlative across this time span or correlative across this culture, when in reality, all we're doing is showing two separate events and appealing to a notion of causation. Chris Grant, we need to show people veganism is what they want, and the same values they already have. Exactly. We need to show that it's not something that is alien from them, but the result of who they already are. Organic is carnist changed my mind. I've been meaning to have a look into this because, I mean, I don't eat organic anyway, so I'm not really concerned, mainly because I'm poor. Uh, but from my understanding, like I looked at Vegan Gains a while ago, and he was talking about how organic fertilizer can be animal feces, that and increased your likelihood of diseases like cholera and stuff like that. So that was interesting. I don't know about carnage though. I don't know if organic would necessarily imply that we must use animal fertilizers if that's the reason why. It may very well be the case that we could use stuff like volcanic rock dust, isn't it? Like, when you can get like fertilized ground. The issue is that like the transportation and the efficacy of this. Maybe hydroponics. That could be like organic, and then you get like people who do like veganic and what's the word? Permaculture. I haven't really looked into that too much. I was talking earlier that I wanted to look more into the development of farming and how veganism should be applied to that. Magnus again, can a vegan still not be a subjectivist? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You can't be a subjectivist vegan. Sorry about that. Oh, it brings us too much pleasure to do that. I totally agree. Criticism is essential to the growth of the movement. Exactly. Thank you, Chris. The ex-Chegan. It is ethical to eat animals if our health is dependent on it. Is it ethical to eat animals if our health is dependent on it? Yes, if you could show why your health was dependent upon it, and you could show that you were determined to do it, that you had no other opportunity, then I would say that it would be ethical to consume animals to such a level that it was necessary in the most humane way possible, and that's where welfareism would come in. But I've seen no evidence for this this affliction affecting anyone. So I don't believe, and I would call anyone's sincerity into question who proposed this. I would like to see evidence of why they can't be vegan. It is not enough to say that they are and assert it as the truth. They must prove why before they can take an authoritative stance and harm another individual. Now, eventually, what I would say is that this would be, if it did exist, what would be wiser is if we treat it as a disease. It's something that needs to be overcome pharmaceutically, if possible, even through the production of meat-like products that could replace certain nutrients. But I do not, not nutrients, but necessarily, well, I just don't believe actually that there's anything, any reason this should be the case. But if it was, then yeah, it should be treated pharmaceutically. Um, Thoughts on the metaphysical school of thought known as objective idealism? You mean Hegelian? That's, I mean, that's Hegelianism, man. Like, yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. That's probably like, I don't want to characterize myself as an objective idealist, like an absolute idealist, but I'm kind of half there. So I've been questioning my metaphysical beliefs more and more. And to say that I've come to any particular conclusion would be wrong right now. I do think that, believe it or not, I think Hegel has a point. And I think what we'll realize is that the way we see the world is a construction that exists from outside, that is outside of us and is applied to us. And who we are exists outside of the biology of our physical form and in the cultural expression of our words. Free will doesn't exist. Change my mind. I am not doing that right now. That's naughty. You stop it. Um, is it ethical to eat humans if our life depended upon it? Yeah, for the exact same reason I said it was ethical to eat animals. Like in a survival situation, I said my friend said it was in a survival situation. I think the ironic thing is, you would. It's not that it's like, just to prove that, just to make a point, it's not that it is ethical. It is that it could not be said to be unethical because the language in which we use would be incapable of aligning with the institutions which give us right and wrong, and so we would be incapable of understanding if our actions are justified or not. And so it's not that eating animals or eating humans would be justified. It's that it would not be unjust to not eat them, because we would be incapable of conversing with an individual who was not determined in the same respect. The only alternative would also be suicide, and you'd have to ask the question of whether an individual would be capable of doing that, and that means ought implies can. Where was I? What do you think of certain people, about certain animal products that people consume, like invertebrates, honey, etc.? I don't believe in the consumption of invertebrates or honey, primarily because I've seen no evidence that they do not feel pain. I would play it safe more than anything. Yeah, and also the environmental impact of eating these things is still pretty bad. I think it's a bad idea. Yeah, so I would give them moral consideration until I could prove that until I had reason to doubt that, like other animals, that their nervous system did not produce pain sensations, so long as they have a brain. If they don't have a brain, I would have to look at the neurological complexity of the animal individually, like an octopus. Right. The sailors on the Franklin expedition. Right? Is that the guy that they turned themselves in because they ate the cabin boy? I think. Um, yeah, that's an interesting thought experiment. I remember doing that at university. Why they weren't held morally accountable, because they all actually felt an extreme amount of guilt, which I think shows that they were that it was a reluctant decision, and I think that there's not actually anything unjustified with what they did. World is vegan 2040 or we are dead. Well, you're probably right in the sense that we do need to have a rapid environmental shift. The progression of veganism is, I would say that it's vital. It's vital for our survival. The neo-Epicurean. I think I used the word "get it" and go vegan. But after reading the comment sections on Primal Edge Health, I think we are very far away. I predict a very big anti-vegan backlash in the UK soon. Well, this is the point I was getting at, that we need to be careful of anti-veganism and ex-veganism, because ideologies can reinforce each other. It's like, think of it like, to give everyone, like, because I'm a Batman fan, let's give everyone an understanding of how this can happen. The Joker's pathology within Batman is a construction not from Gotham alone, but from the existence of Batman. And that's the point. And they reinforce each other's pathology. Because if the Joker didn't exist, then Batman would not become useless because he has other villains. But part of Batman's part of the necessity, the justification for Batman being Batman would die out, and the Joker would not exist without the ability to rebel and conquer the Batman. So it's something that I think how people operate is implicit with not just individuals and how we operate, and we all seek to individualize ourselves, but within markets themselves and how we are affected by markets. people particularly don't make their own decisions. They're influenced by markets. And as a vegan market develops, an anti-vegan market will develop. So what we need to do is understand who the individuals are who are going to be affected by the anti-vegan market and approach them with rational discussion in order to influence them in a more positive light. So yeah. The ex-vegan, yes, we can say eating animals is unethical because there's no necessity to eat animals. Shadow Starshine, how do you establish the mind-body connection? Do you think reductionism or correlation are strong enough methodologies? I just woke up, PP, hello. Oh God. You see, I don't. See, I've been trying to wrap my head around where I stand on the mind-body understanding, because I would say that the mind is a construction by the body in the sense that it operates within the mechanism of the individual. However, the mind is altered by a technological, what's the word? Shall we call it? What's the word that augmentation given by language. So the mind can't be, I think, reduced down to the bare components that it is made. That being said, if we take into consideration that the mind is partly because it exists in the way it does, and that our neurons are structured by our language and these produce our sense of selves, then it would be the case that if physicalism was true, then the mind would be a physical entity, and that would be it would have to be the case. But I'll get back to you on that. I'll get back to you. Well, we'll see where I end up. Have I started doing any street activism yet? Well, I'm just emailing some institutions tonight. I've got the email addresses of 5 institutions, so I'm going to be doing debates, hopefully, at some UK institutions. So I'll be uploading them to my channel. We'll see where they go, because I'm interested. I want it to go, especially places where they have philosophy. I want to talk to people who aren't vegan and have strong arguments of why they're not. I don't want to talk to I know this is going to sound bad, but I don't want to talk to the people who cannot be said to be, I'm interested in single combat. I want to fight Achilles. I want to fight Hector. I want to fight whoever it is, these anti-vegan heroes, whoever they are. And, and I want to show them why veganism is true. And if I can convince those people who are making the strongest arguments, then it will have the greatest overall impact within an academic circle. And that's what I want to do, because if those individuals are good at arguing against veganism, then they'll certainly be good at arguing for veganism after the conversation. So yeah. 1 second, where'd I go? Right. Can aesthetic and religious arguments be both effective depending upon the person you are debating? I think they can, but beware tying veganism to any notion of conceptual gap. Don't say, for example, that God wanted you to be vegan. You want to say that there is nothing in your religion that prevents you from being vegan, and that these are the justifications of why you should be. And more so, what you want to say is that your belief in a religion has to be rational. Otherwise, you would be incapable of understanding the scripture or whatever it is that is giving you your religious understanding. And since logic isn't a choice, you would be that if I can present an irrational argument, if I can present a rational argument to be vegan and you dismiss it, then your reasoning to be religious or holding those religious beliefs would also be caprice, and that they would have no justification in believing in whatever it is that they stand for without believing in veganism as well. Right. Do you ever feel remorse over the name choice, considering your initials are PP? No, that only brings it greater value. You know how much I love PPs and veganism. So yeah, that's how that goes. Just in case anyone's wondering, I'm actually not gay, and Vegan Voyager is my girlfriend. She appreciates the name choice as well. Also, alliteration helps. Kevin, hello. Nice to see you here, man. I hope you're having a good day. It's been a while. Chris Grant, do you think there could be a tipping point when we reach 10 to 20% where people will find it much easier to vegan? 100%. I think that the more people that go vegan, the easier it will become. Both because of the change in markets, producing vegan products for this developing vegan population, but also because as the population goes vegan, the institutional pressure upon being vegan will diminish just as much as the pressure to go vegan will increase. So I think being vegan will become considerably easier. It's a lot easier to agree with the majority than it is to defy it. Veganism is unhealthy, case closed. Because we like to assert the truth here. Banana Warrior Princess. There's philosophy at the UEA, and I am going to change my mind. Oh, that'll be cool. I'm interested in watching that. I was thinking about what to call mine. What do you think? I was thinking about debate a vegan or something like that. I want people to approach me because it makes it a hell of a lot easier from what I've seen versus you get people who are genuinely wanting to engage, and that's what I want. I want people to be willing to engage. I don't want to just stop people and then be like, please get away from me. um, uh, uh, would veganism as an ideological and lifestyle be misplaced in the third world societies? No. I don't think so. I think that ideologically, you need to approach every society from where it's at. I don't know what's this. Each culture, each language has its own limitations. Veganism may be out of reach for some of them, if I'm honest. It not forever, and it shouldn't be ever abandoned, because if it's abandoned, then the progression will slow. But there will be only a select few individuals within any culture that could go vegan. I mean, like 1,000, 2,000 years ago, there would be those people who understood the reasons to be vegan within our cultures. They might have been that advanced for that time, but the general population would simply not understand the conceptual growth that was required. These people may have had to do so many logical steps to reach this point, that in fact they wouldn't even be able to be sure that they were right in the first place, because they would have no means for verification, because all of the other individuals within that society do not understand what they're talking about, and it would seem to be nonsensical. So I would say progress equality as a conceptual notion as far as you can culturally. Call into question why they make the decisions they do, and what separates individuals and animals and all other groups from moral consideration, and get them to question the foundations of what morality is and why they make decisions. And that, I think, will bring the fastest development, because once you start forcing them into metaethics, you'll see a greater development, as it were. It's very hard to introduce people into metaethics, so don't actually introduce them to the subject. Just question their values, right? And they'll do the rest. What do you think of the idea that all our arguments must be syllogisms? It took us a while to realize why you said that. Well, of course. The thing is, I think I saw Rem. I think Rem really knows logic as well. Like he's like so well read on logic and stuff. Like I was talking to him a while ago on that. He does like what's it? Like I'm interested in mostly ethics and meta ethics, but he's mostly interested in meta epistemology. And I think he was telling us that, like ask yourself and stuff. He's not actually using a syllogism. I need to look more into what he's like, like meta logic, because I just find it incredibly boring. But I think logic is incredibly important. Not formal logic, but logic is incredibly important. But not syllogisms. No, I don't. I don't think we need to use syllogisms all the time. Just so damn unnecessary. I mean, like if you start putting, especially with formal logic and not even a natural language argument, if you start putting formal logic in front of people who have no understanding of logic, it's like showing them maths, and they just turn off and they're just like, nah, I'm out of here. And it's the fact that it doesn't do anything other than present an argument in a different form, that we can present the argument in like, if you read like a Socratic dialogue, it's not a syllogism, but it shows contradictions because he presents the argument in such a way that he can develop the conversation to lead to a contradiction. We don't need to just be like, what's the rational form of what's the most presentable form of argumentation? And I think that the reason why he's come to this conclusion, and I can't blame him, to be honest, because I think that he's really, the where he sits is close to the birthplace of analytic philosophy, and the philosophy that he does is typically tied into the philosophy of the mid 20th century. Um, yeah, this kind of removal of continental, language from the equation, and are trying to get as close to the logical foundations as possible. Well, I don't think that he's doing exactly what they did, but he's taken it just a step further. And I don't think there's anything wrong with what he's. Well, yes, I do. I think there's a lot wrong with what he's doing, but I wouldn't blame him for doing it. Right. The ex-Jigan. Imagine if a justice system worked in. Sorry, he's talking to someone else. I don't care. A statement of your comment about religious arguments for veganism. Arguing Genesis with theist vegans has been some of the most frustrating theistic debates I've endured. Well, to be honest, Magnus, like, I wouldn't talk about specific religious scripture. I think that is absolutely pointless. And I think to do that means that, well, what happens when individuals leave their religion, which happens often? People lose their religions for whatever reason. I certainly do not want them losing veganism along with it. So you will not catch me arguing those lines of discussion. Do you think meat will be replaced by lab meat eventually, or do you think we will lose interest in meat? I think it will be replaced by lab meat, unfortunately, unless we do progress veganism faster than science is able to reduce the cost of lab-grown meat, or that vegan meats, meat replacements, are not only have a greater overhead, because no one's going to create lab-grown meat if it's capitalistically, like, if it's not a capitalist in a capitalist state, if it's not profitable. And I think that needs to be that needs to hit home. Unless there's a market behind it, people will not produce these alternatives. Do you think meat will be replaced by lab meat? Oh, no, sorry, that was has consumerism replaced religion? Yes. As an implicit ideological stance that governs what behavior, consumerism has replaced religion. It's not the same thing as religion. Like, I hope everyone understands that. It's not that we worship money. It's that what we do is no longer in relation to. Well, to be honest, I don't even think that. I think what's funny is it's not that consumerism's even replaced religion, I suppose. What I would say is that the actions of individuals have become increasingly egoistical within our society, to the point in which they are destroying their own selves. And that would be Deleuze as individuals. Markets produce people, and rather than people producing markets. But the point I'm getting at is that it's an ideological growth upon how we've approached religion in the first place. It's the idea of being the better Christian. My grandmother, well, my nana, always used to say, the closer the altar, the bigger the hypocrite. And that's the kind of understanding I think individuals have in our society, in the sense that people are trying to be better, but for the wrong reasons. They want to be better than other people, but not to be better just in general. They don't want to be better for themselves. They don't want to be better for the world. They want to be better than. And I think that's what consumerism is. It's no different than how everyone else has sought power throughout history, and that it's only found itself in the marketability of social life that capitalism brings. How will someone know if you're making an argument if it's not a syllogism? I don't know. Maybe I should write. Like if I say a sentence, I should probably hold up a question mark as well. Like, do you think the UK will be vegan by 2030? I mean, how would anyone know that was a question if I didn't hold up a question mark? Uh, um, yeah. Right. I think that's all the questions for now. Oh, wait a minute. And on a similar topic, does sentientism exist, and is it prevalent? No, sentientism totally exists, and I think it's very prevalent. I think it's implicitly prevalent in how people actually approach day-to-day life. I think people realize that harming animals is totally unjustified. Probably because of their moral progression from just interacting with their pets, interacting with animals in day to day, from having discussions upon how the atrocities that are happening within the rainforests that are being destroyed and how wrong this is. But there's a cognitive, excuse me, but there's cognitive dissonance going on. People have one value structure as well as having another. It's okay to eat meat. It's not okay that we have deforestation. It's okay to go to a zoo, but it's not okay to hold animals captive and abuse them. There's this constant ideological tension within our society that people need to address. But in the words of Heraclitus, all things come to pass through conflict. So hopefully veganism and sentientism will progress as such. I hope I did say hi to you, Twisted Hippie. Yeah. Um, I think, let's see, I'll just make sure that I've covered what I wanted to cover. Yeah, I think that's pretty much everything in what I wanted to cover on the will the UK be vegan by 2030. Obviously, I haven't thrown too much information empirically into the space. That's not what I do for the most part. In fact, philosophy, we don't answer questions. We just propose new ones, and that's I think part of the fun. If anyone has anything that'd like to be said or answered, just let us know. And I think that we need to, with this topic in mind, will the UK be vegan by 2030? We can't just focus on the UK. We can't. It's cool. We can appreciate that the UK may be vegan, but we live in a global community. I'm sitting here, and many of you, might not be from the UK, and you are listening to me talking about the UK. Now, that's not okay. I need to talk to all of you. I need to be presenting my arguments for veganism to all of you. I mean, if we're in a susceptible language community, I mean, for the most part, the West speaks even the same kind of English, in the sense that we'll have a wide variety of similar concepts and moral spheres that actually overlap. And because of that, we should exploit the growing digital age, the digital era in which we are in, to progress the institutions which now breach borders. We no longer live in national states or purely nation states. We live in a global community, and we should treat it as such. like my vegan brothers and sisters, as it were, across borders are doing just as much good for in other countries as they are in Britain. And the UK is growing towards veganism very rapidly, and that's great. But we certainly do not want veganism to be purely tied to any national identity. Because otherwise the French will never go vegan, guys. We don't we don't want the French to be like, well, I would be vegan, but the British are vegan. Uh, I'm only joking because, like, in the past, there was a rivalry between Britain and France, and Britain used to call, like, England used to call the chlamydia the French disease, and the French used to call chlamydia the English disease. So there's like a historical rivalry there. And also, the Scottish would never go vegan if the English went vegan, and then you know. There's too many problems with associating ideologies with pathologies. We need this ideology to be implicit in all pathologies. So Albion for Camelot. Yeah, and well, I hope that answers the question. If one second, why wouldn't you consider meat genetically animal grown in a vat? Why wouldn't you consider meat genetically animal grown in a vat without any environmental impact than plant production be vegan? Well, I would, but I mean, like, unless we had a perma-cell culture, the chances of that happening would be unlikely. Also, I don't want people. Also, veganism is a moral progression. It's not an omnivorous person who thinks it's okay to harm animals buying a factory lab grown meat replacement. It's someone coming to the conclusion that that animals are morally considerable, and that's what you have to remember. It's about the progression of the individual and their intentions and how they approach life and who they are, just as much as how they behave. Now, they are very closely related, which is why I think virtue ethics is vitally important, but we should not neglect people's intentions and focus purely on consequences, consequences, because we will ultimately undo any potential progression that could be made. So I hope that answers that. Right. I think I've been doing it for about an hour and a half now. So I'm going to wrap this up. So I hope you've all enjoyed this discussion. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. And tomorrow I will be streaming on whether people who are raised as plant-based, that people who are raised vegan, so tomorrow I will be streaming on whether those who are raised as vegans are truly vegan or are they just plant-based. So if you're interested in a discussion upon the moral education of individuals, please come back tomorrow. And as always, try to gain some perspective. And to finally just say this, thank you to everyone who's participated. It's been a pleasure. And I'm waiting for that.